Welcome to the Giant Step podcast with your host, Maurice Bernstein, as we take you on a journey into music and culture from the world of Giant Step.
Hello and welcome to the Giant Step podcast, your journey into music and culture. I'm your host, Maurice Bernstein. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Giant Step. Today's podcast is with Ivan Wicksteed. Ivan is the Chief Growth and Revenue Officer at Aspiration Bank. And we talk about the future of banking, fintech, the environment, and Bitcoin as well. The recording was originally done as part of Giant Step's Instagram Live on April the 9th, 2021. So please excuse any sort of noise issues or audio problems because the content, as usual, is well worth listening to. And as always, if you want to find out more about Giant Step, visit our website at giantstep.net and follow us on Instagram at @GiantStep. And please send us any feedback or thoughts on our shows. So now please enjoy my conversation with Ivan Wicksteed. Ivan, welcome. For those that don't know, this is Ivan Wicksteed. Ivan is the Chief Growth and Revenue Officer at Aspiration Bank, which sounds like a very fancy title. We'll get into what that actually means in a bit. We've been, working with each other over the years on many different things, which we'll get into as well. But I think, your story, I think, is quite inspirational. So I always like to start at the beginning so people can understand how, a lad from Warrington, for those who know where Warrington is, managed to rise to the heights of the CMO of Fortune 500 companies. So let's start at the beginning, Ivan. When?
Oh, Jesus. Lying, theft, deception.
That sounds like my story. No, I want to hear your story.
I guess it's easy to, what's the Steve Jobs quote, sort of like join the dots backwards, but it's less easy to join them forward. I'd like to say that I set out with a sort of a career plan and just sort of checked off the boxes, but nothing could be further from the truth. I mean, that's not the way it went for me. In fact, I studied marketing at university briefly and hated it and dropped out. I thought it was the most boring subject in the world. I still do, actually, to be honest with you. From an academic perspective, I love doing it. I love being a CMO. I love doing marketing, but I think as an academic subject, it's a little dry. I think it's a practical
hands-on
discipline, you know what I mean? It's like dancing, you know what I mean? You got to do it.
Yeah, you can do all the theory, you can learn all the theory, but it's all about how you execute and practice.
I think so. Yeah, that's the fun part of it. So kind of, I guess looking back on it, my career was sort of concentric circles of just, I was in with the agency side and sort of on the more creative, and then that kind of led to client side.
But before that, I mean, you grew up in the north of England, fairly near to me, actually. We did not know each other. You're from Warrington, right?
Yeah, that's right.
And for those that don't know, Warrington is what they call a new town. So it was like a town that was pretty much built like less than 100 years ago. It's sort of like urban planning, people leaving the inner cities and coming more to the suburbs, and it's located in between Liverpool and Manchester.
It's a shithole, basically. Is what you're trying to say.
Right. Well, it's kind of a place that has really no history and no identity. And no, it's true. I mean, whereas but it was a way of people to escape from the mundane inner city, because the cities like Manchester, Liverpool, were these industrial, decaying cities.
Yeah. Well, probably the simplest way of putting it is that I left there running when I was 18, and I've never been back.
Actually, there's some very famous people. There's some very famous people from Warrington. The actor
Stone Roses lead singer.
Mm-hmm. Ian Brown is from Warrington, but also his name will come to me. He's a famous English actor, curly black hair. It'll come to me. But go on. Yeah.
Right. Anyway, I don't want to bore people with my personal life history, but just sort of concentric circles, I guess, of finding, following my nose in terms of like what I've always done, what I found interesting to do. Like I've never actually, other than the first job that I ever had, which was I only really took that job because I fancied the girl that was in the interview process, and we ended up dating for a few years, but it wasn't suited to it. That was like a market research job. Other than that one, which I took for the wrong reasons when I was 21 years old, I've always done things that I just enjoyed doing, and it's kind of one thing's led to the other, So like I said, sort of broadening sort of concentric circles, sort of strategy led to sort of more creative, led to agency, led to client, and then ultimately, been a CMO for a while now.
But this was in London, so you left Warrington running. You went to university. Where did you go to university?
Lancaster.
You went up north. You went further up north. And then when you finished that, you then started working. And you said the first job you only did it because you fancied the person who was interviewing you. What was that? What was that job?
It was research. It was like a market research firm called Research International, and it was basically what happened. So I ended up doing it for a few years. It was intellectually interesting, but like the folks around me weren't really of my type. They weren't particularly sort of people that I'd hang out with. I didn't really know anyone this was the 1990s in London, and advertising was still kind of like a sort of a glamour industry, I guess. There was a lot of money going around, the parties were good, and then I just started running into people in the advertising industry, and they just they threw much better parties than market researchers did. And
that's very surprising.
So I started hanging out with the advertising people and kind of got into it that way, and then I was on the agency side for a while in London.
And which were some of the agencies that you worked for in London?
My first one was Amirati Puris Lintas, which is sort of a New York merged with a London agency, and then I was with I was at DDB, BMP, which is like the home of planning, basically, which is what I was doing. I was a strategist, basically, so the home of planning. Really did that for a little while, and then I jumped ship to again, it was kind of random, coincidental. There's a guy that was trying to hire me in London, and he moved to LA, and he joined an agency in LA called TBWA Chiat Day, run by Lee Clow. So he came over there, and he called me up one day, and he was like, "Hey, I've got this job. Why don't you come out?" So got on a plane and went to LA, and that was 20 years ago.
And it was your first time in the States when you came to LA?
No, I'd been to New York before, but I hadn't been to LA before. And I'd never been to LA, and I did the classic sort of jet lag thing, woke up at 3:00 in the morning staring at the ceiling fan, and I got in my rental car. I remember I drove up I was at Santa Monica. I drove up all the way up to the hills, and then all the way down Santa Monica Boulevard down to Malibu. And as I was coming down, it was probably 7:00 in the morning. There was like a pod of dolphins going by. So I'm like a poor kid from the north of England, you know what I mean? Never seen any dolphins in my life before,
yeah.
you know, certainly never seen it, you know,
Mm-hmm.
in the Pacific Ocean at 7 o'clock in the morning. So I stopped the car, took off my clothes and jumped in the water. I went swimming about, you know, then went back to the hotel, and I still had a couple of hours to kill. It was probably 9 o'clock in the morning. I remember phoned my mate Michelle in London, said, "That's it. I'm staying out here. This is it. Los Angeles is my life." You know, she's like, "Oh, congratulations, you got the job." I was like, "Well, I haven't interviewed yet, actually, technically, but you know, I already decided I'm moving here." So, you know, any city where you can swim with dolphins before breakfast has got to be,
amazing.
you know. So, yeah, LA, and then since LA, then I've basically been flitting back and forth between the coasts, you know, LA for a few years and New York. I went up to Massachusetts a little bit to work at Converse. I was with Nike for a bit, then came back here to New York again to be the CMO of Cole Haan, and then went to San Francisco to be the CMO at Old Navy, and then, you know, stuck around on the West Coast for a little bit, and then back in New York now.
And then you were at Coca-Cola for a little bit as well.
Mm-hmm.
Were you in Atlanta for that?
I was not. No, I mean, yes, I was. I never lived in Atlanta. I lived in New York. I lived in the Four Seasons, basically, in Atlanta for 5 years. You know, I used to have my dry cleaning and mail and stuff sent there. But I never actually got an apartment in Atlanta. I never kind of went that far. You know, I just flitted between them. That was a crazy job, though. I mean, I was just like flying around the world all the time, you know, sort of just lapping the world. When I look back, I did it for 5 years, and when I look back at that, it just is just one continuous stream of jet lag.
What were you doing?
Basically, sort of working with the agencies globally, you know, for Coca-Cola. So working with all of the different, you know, creative agencies, advertising agencies, to try and, you know, help them develop their work basically for Coca-Cola. It was pretty amazing time, you know, to be able to have that level of sort of exposure to the best creative talent in the world, you know, Dan Wyden and you know, Alex Bogusky, and you know, just these amazing creative minds all kind of working on the business. Coca-Cola is definitely a door opener. It wasn't really my cup of tea, to be honest with you. I wasn't really very well suited to Coca-Cola.
Right.
You know, culturally speaking, it didn't really find my footing there particularly. You know, I've been much happier since then, right. in other places, you know. But it was amazing exposure for sure.
And we first started working together when you were at Cole Haan. You were the CMO of Cole Haan, the shoe company, which is a classic American shoe.
Well, it wasn't until we got hold of it. Yeah,
right. But you really came in, and your goal was to really sort of flip the script on the perception, the positioning, and the people who were wearing them as well. Like trying to get a whole new generation to wear them. And one of my first memories of you as a CMO, which I found to be quite unique from my experience, was instead of you hiring one agency for the campaign, you kind of hired a bunch of agencies together, and we all worked together for the brand, which was something I'd never done before, which was quite interesting. And you didn't pit us against each other, but you created this sort of tension to make sure that we all came up with the best work for you. It was kind of an interesting. Is that your philosophy of how to work with it? I mean,
I mean, it was definitely something that I did a lot of when I was at Coke. But I think at that time, you know, like that was around the time where it was kind of like right at the beginning of that fragmentation of the agency world that was just starting to happen. You know, for a few decades preceding that, you know, really up until the 2000s, it was pretty normal to have like a agency of record, you know, and that agency, AORs, you know, and they would do everything, you know, for you. You know, they'd do the PR, they'd do the advertising, earned, paid, owned.
And some of it they do well, and some of them they would do awful.
they'd like basically own the brand for you, you know, and like just take care of it. It was a one-stop shop, you know, one-click solution kind of thing. And that's how it was for quite a long time. And then, you know, in the 2000s, that all started to fall apart. And now you know, it's just it's not practical, right? You're not going to have someone who knows music and culture is unlikely to be the same person or the same agency that knows how to do acquisition marketing the most effectively. So, you know, it's the world we live in.
And you basically, in your way of changing the perception of the Cole Haan brand, you created basically a New York takeover over a period of time where we just crazy things started happening.
We threw a lot of parties.
Well, it was more than that. I mean, there were storefront takeovers. I mean, like, you know, we worked on an event for you guys where we had this young guy called Diplo DJ, and we had Santi Gold perform, and we did it at the Poisson Rouge. And I think I remember telling the venue that we would have 200 people there for like an hour or something, and we ended up having like 3,000 people there all night.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that was a pretty, you know, of all of the CMO gigs or the marketing gigs that I've been involved with, that was the one I had probably had more fun with that one than any other, because it was such a turnaround. You know, it was such a, you know, Cole Haan was this sort of fusty old, you know, sort of it's your granddad's shoe, basically. You know, it was a comfort shoe. And but they had this, you know, it had been bought by Nike, you know, years prior, and they had this, you know, really interesting technology. You know, this was before, I mean, now it's like, you know, everyone's doing it now, but they were the first company to really put that whole, like, to take running shoe technology and put it into a brown shoe. You know, like no one had done that before, and like, so that was cool. Like disruptive, you know, an interesting idea. So like it led itself to that idea of like, let's make this the shoe that you can go to work in, but you can also go out after work. And so like that whole New York, you know, like never go home was the creative campaign that we ran with, and it was about encouraging basically people to, you know, go out and stay out, you know, in those shoes. And
it was like up all night, right?
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah. And that's what all of the, you know, the ultraviolet, you know, those projections and everything were on the storefronts. But yeah, it was incredibly successful. That shoe, that one shoe, the Lunar Grand, just blew up. I remember we had a launch party for, you might have been there actually. We had a launch party at the store in Soho. We had the flagship store in Soho, and I was living nearby. I think I was living in Tribeca, and we had this, you know, essentially a PR launch for it in that store. And I was cycling by the next morning on my way to the office, and there were these Japanese kids standing outside the store. It was like 9 o'clock in the morning. I thought they were sizing up the store or something. So I stopped and asked them what they were up to. And they had come into town to get that. That was the only place you could get that shoe at that time. And they'd come into town because they'd read about it in I think we were on Sneaker Freaker, and they'd come in to get, you know, to get the shoe. So there was a line, basically. I don't think there'd ever been a line outside that store before. So there was a line of these sneakerheads that were coming in to this brown shoe company to get in line to buy this shoe. And that was the beginning, I think, of that whole athleisure sort of movement there of, you know, that then so many other brands then jumped on, but no one else was doing it at that time. So I credit Mark Parker at Nike actually with coming up with the idea. He's the one who actually glued the sole of a Nike free running shoe to a leather upper. I mean, it was his idea. Yeah, it was a disruptive idea, right? People, it was something new.
Yeah, and then after that, you went over to Old Navy, which is obviously a global, you know, retail powerhouse as part of Gap. But a very different type of fashion that you sort of work with in the past, very different type of product, and you know, and I remember like the advertising and the marketing was very tongue in cheek, very funny. Just very. It had you put a certain wit to the brand.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't. Yeah. I mean, the advertising that was happening before I got there in like the end of 2012, I think it was well, let me put it this way. They were using a lot of music, actually. They actually, at one point, is kind of interesting to you, probably. They were, Old Navy had, I think, aspirations of being a record company.
That's right. Yeah, you told me
and they
about
wanted
that,
to.
yeah.
They wanted to. So they were using a lot of musicians in their advertising and putting bands in there. But for some reason, which I still don't know, I don't know why, but they were using like literally Boys to Men were in the commercial that they made. This was like 2012, right? Boys to Men,
Boys to Men, they're already old men.
Very old men.
Old men to very old men, yeah.
So I don't know why they were using, musicians from the 1990s and 1980s, but I don't know. But yeah, so I think we just brought it up to date a little bit, and we had Amy Poehler, and just put some more, just put some funny people in the ads, basically.
Yeah, and we started doing the music for you. I'll never forget the call I got from you. I was in Miami at Art Basel, and you said, I've just been traveling around the world to all the Old Navy, different retail stores to visit them. And if I walk into one more and hear that music, I'm going to kill myself. So I need you.
Yeah,
I'm begging you, please help me.
That's right.
I was like, okay. All right.
Oh my God, it was painful. I'm like you. I'm like very sensitive to and attuned to music if it's playing in the background. If I walk into a restaurant or a store, like if I'm in I just immediately start tuning into it. So it's offensive to me, when if I'm supposedly, trying to direct the brand, but I'm hearing, god awful music.
Yeah.
So yeah, well, thanks for helping out with that. It definitely got better.
Yeah, we're still doing it.
I know you are.
With it. Yeah. Do you want to talk about Oscar at all before we get into Aspiration? Because there's like so much I want to get into with this sort of.
We can jump straight.
Yeah.
We can jump straight to Aspiration. I mean,
cool.
Yeah, that's fine.
So, I think the first thing before we talk about Aspiration, can you give a definition of fintech for the audience? So they can, because Aspiration is obviously part of the fintech.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, so we're not throwing words around that. Yeah.
I don't know what the correct definition of fintech. I mean, financial firm, the banking space, the financial space, it's similar to what we were just talking about with the agencies, is being fragmented and disintermediated by a whole bunch of different players, right? Whether it's investors like Robinhood, or it's savers like Acorns, or it's banking alternatives or whatever, so there's just there's blood in the water. I think that the big banks fell asleep at the wheel to a large extent, and there's just a new generation of customers. There's new payment options, like buy now, pay later, new credit options, there's just a new generation that's coming through that is looking at those old banks, and it's like, it doesn't have to be that way, why? I don't necessarily want a bank that has 500 branches, and I don't necessarily need a manager that I can talk to. If I can do it online, then maybe that's better. So I think there's been a few waves now of these like new fintech companies that have come out, but it's hard to come up with a single definition. Fintech's kind of a catch-all phrase, really, for saying like anyone who's using technology in a disruptive way to
finance.
To screw around with the world of finance, which mostly means like the big banks or the big investment companies. And it's such a huge market that there's just a lot of there's a lot of ways of disrupting it.
And you're the Chief Growth and Revenue Officer at Aspiration Bank.
Yeah,
How long has Aspiration Bank been around for?
about 6 years. It's really just scaling now, though, without going, too much into a history lesson. It had to go through the process. It's actually not technically, it's not a bank. It's actually a broker dealer, which is just it's a different denomination, if you like. In order to be accredited with the status of bank, you have to, it's just a slightly different denomination. But to all intents and purposes, it functions in a similar way. You have a debit card, you can deposit checks, etc., and withdraw money and spend money in the way that you would with a regular bank account. But in order to get that status, we had to go through this. Before I joined, I've only been there for 7 months before I joined. So in 2019, I had to go through this, pretty painful process of getting the sort of accreditation, being accredited with that status. So long story short, it's been around for 5 or 6 years now. But I think in the last 6 months, one of the reasons I joined when I joined, and the reason I joined is because they have a decent amount of funding. They're sort of Series C. They've raised a lot of money, and are really ramping up and scaling. So it's probably pretty true to say that 6 months ago, and even today, most people haven't heard of it. We're running, we just did a big campaign in Austin. We're doing one in LA right now.
Yeah,
so it's pretty visible.
I was going to say, I'm walking around Venice. I was sending you pictures of, I'm seeing sort of like decals sprayed on the pavement, and so your the bank's sort of mantra is clean finance, right? What is clean finance?
Well, it's kind of the opposite of dirty money, basically. And what I call dirty money, I mean, it's not a recognized term. It's just something that it's a handy way of thinking about it. Most of the big financial institutions, certainly the big four banks in the US, they actively support the fossil fuel industry, so oil and coal industry. I think the big four banks alone last year donated over $220 billion to the oil and coal industry. So that's what I mean by dirty money, and they're not alone. There's most of the big financial institutions do. So basically, what happens when you have a bank account is, when you go to sleep at night, the bank account on your behalf, invests that money and tries to make money on the money that you deposit with them. And most people don't have too much visibility of how they invest that money or what they do with it. And don't ask too many questions about it. But so dirty money in my mind, I mean, I'm a pretty committed environmentalist, and believe that believe strongly, in fact, that global warming, it's been talked about for a long time, but a lot has changed since Al Gore stood up and talked about the inconvenient truth, and it's not all been good. In fact, it's not, you have the Paris Accord, and some good things happened, but there hasn't been the level of action that has needed to be taken, given the urgency of the threat that he was trying to draw attention to. And in fact, most scientists agree that in this decade, if we don't take urgent action now, urgent action meaning like we're talking hundreds of billions of dollars of spend to develop alternative energies and to reduce our dependency on fossil fuel. If we don't do that in this decade, that we will reach a point of no return. Yeah, and that there will be a tipping point. There is a tipping point coming in the next in the next few years, and like that's a terrifying thought to me. So like I very much I'm definitely motivated by that and feel like I want to do something about it. And this, this idea that my bank is, like I'm using recycled paper, I'm, driving an eco-friendly car, I'm doing this and I'm doing that. But then when I go to sleep at night, my bank is investing hundreds of billions of dollars in oil and gas. Is just, it's not something that most people think about.
Amongst other things as well. I mean,
firearms and prisons,
blood money, and
yeah.
I mean, so really, this campaign that the bank is doing is forcing people to confront a very uncomfortable conversation and difficult conversation about, because we're all woke. We all try to be very, very woke, but you're right. We have our Teslas and our recycled paper and restored this and restored that, and our money is dirty. And people really don't think about that.
In fact, some of the creative you might see in LA right now is, in fact, I think got like the back of the LA Times for the next few weekends, and a bunch of billboards, which it just says, pick one, either A, I believe in global warming, or B, I bank with a big bank. And we're trying to force people to confront that inconvenient truth, that difficult. I mean, it's a confrontational idea that, do you really, like, I like to think of myself as a good global citizen that's trying to do the best that I can, but at the same time, not everything you do, there are some things that you do that just have a much greater effect than others. And unfortunately, banking, where you put your money, where you keep your money anyway, has an oversized effect on the environment and the environmental impact, much greater, for example, than using recycled bags. Right. Not that people should stop doing that. They should keep doing that.
Yeah, but it's kind of like that's a physical thing that they see, whereas this is it's not in your face. It's not like a pile of like plastic. And some of the other things that you're using is what it's like clean rich, filthy money, and
clean rich is a new filthy rich.
Yeah. No, it's very interesting. I mean, it really is. It's creating that tension with people to really think about where their money is. Another thing, I think that's important when we talk about environmentalism and we talk about global warming is who is really affected by that. Obviously, we all live on the same planet, but let's talk a little bit more about the people who really get affected by global warming and the harm to the environment.
Yeah, we did. It's an interesting point. We did a last month for Black History Month. We did a series of pieces sort of celebrating environmentalists who also happen to be people of color who are doing, making a positive difference and contributing to the sort of environmentalist cause. And the reason that we did that, the reason it's important, I think, actually this conversation, I don't hear too much about this conversation in the national dialogue, but it should be, is that global warming affects disproportionately, to a very large degree, affects minorities to a much greater extent, largely because of kind of like where they live to a large extent. The environmental impact of global warming is not felt equally by all socioeconomic groups, unfortunately, which is something, like, as I say, that just doesn't get enough airtime in my view. We just recently brought on a board member, Ben Jealous, who has been a lifelong advocate of this and has been sort of getting a ton of press recently around this topic, but yeah, it needs more. It needs more exposure because it's. I think it's getting to a crisis point with certain communities. And not like rising water levels is one example of that, but it's not the only one.
Yeah, and on the same subject, we talk about the carbon offset and green offset, this sort of greenwashing.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about that, because that's kind of a lot of people are trying to feel that they're cleansing their
I mean, greenwashing is when you're dealing with a topic like environmentalism, environmental impact, sustainability, by definition it's a long-term thing, right? So you do what you can in supporting it, but at the end of the day, the actions that you take by using recycled bags or driving an eco-friendly car is going to be felt by your children. You're not probably going to feel it yourself. So it's a long-term impact. Because of that, it's easy to not do it. It's easy to like, oh, screw it. I'll just use a plastic bag today, and or drive a gas guzzling car or bank with a big bank. And so all greenwashing really needs to do is to introduce just like an element of doubt, just an element of, well, maybe they're not as bad as they maybe they're not actually that bad. So the example that I use sometimes to describe this is like there's a publication called Nature Conservancy, and I happen to subscribe to it because I donated to them in the past, and they're sponsored by Bank of America, specifically the Bank of America Green Card. I can't remember what it's called, but Bank of America donate hundreds of billions of dollars to the oil and coal industry, and yet they're sponsoring this Nature Conservancy magazine with their green card. So you see that, and unless you really do the due diligence and the digging into and really look at how the money gets spent, you think, oh, maybe they're not so bad after all. It seems like they're doing something for the environment, and they are doing something for the environment, but the thing they're doing for the environment is this big, and the thing that they're doing that destroys the environment is this big. So it's just massively disproportionate, and unfortunately there's just a lot of that going on. So it's easy to introduce confusion. Plus, I would say we live, because of what's happened in the last 4 years, I think we live in, and I'm not just talking about the Trump presidency, I'm talking about QAnon and the times that we live in, that the people's relationship with the truth has changed. So, I don't think there's such a thing as objectivity anymore. So introducing just a little bit of doubt around this topic, or a little bit of confusion around this topic, which is what lobbyists are paid to do, is sometimes all it takes.
Yeah, no, I mean, very, very true. And the whole what is true and what is not true now. I mean, nobody. I mean, it's like I'll give you the example of the election. The election happened. It was counted multiple times, and then there's still millions of people who will believe to their grave that it was stolen. So it's very scary. I wanted to get your opinion as the sort of chief growth and revenue officer of a fintech bank on cryptocurrency and blockchain, because this really is the it's a very, very hot topic. I believe that blockchain and crypto is here to stay. Wanted to first of all get a sense of, without you divulging any secrets, is Aspiration planning to support cryptocurrency, and then just get a sense of where you see blockchain and crypto going.
Yeah. I'll preface this with I'm by no means a cryptocurrency expert. So I And
so any of your recommendations people should not
should not listen to. Absolutely do not listen to my recommendations on it. There's a lot of speculation in that market right now. The one thing I would say though is what's pretty shocking to me, actually, I recently found this out, is the amount of energy that it takes for Bitcoin in particular. I think Bitcoin's the worst offender in this respect. But the energy that it takes to mine Bitcoins is phenomenal. The amount of energy that was used in mining Bitcoins last year, I think, was greater than the amount of energy that was used in total in the country of Portugal. So it's like, it takes a lot of energy, to mine Bitcoins because of the server farms. So it's interesting because, it's attracting people who are interested in alternative investment and who want to do something, outside of the sort of traditional infrastructure, but at the same time, it has this huge environmental impact. So I do believe that as it gets normalized and as it grows and becomes more mainstream, you saw, Elon and just announced, it's becoming mainstream, right? It just announced a large investment. I think you will see or are seeing the emergence of, more sort of environmentally friendly forms of crypto, that act as an alternative to Bitcoin. And I think, as that market matures, I think you'll just like, clean finance currently, only really applies to alternatives to traditional banking. But I think you'll see that also in alternatives to sort of traditional crypto, if you can say that yet, sort of traditional crypto being Bitcoin.
Yeah. Absolutely. And as a CMO, multiple companies, I wanted to get a sense of where you see the post COVID workplace. I mean, how do you see the office experience, or what are you thinking about the office experience being, with the fact that we've had this tremendous shift from, it's all about working in offices, working as teams, face to face, travel, and just, office. And we've had a year of, virtual living and working from all over in the world. What do you see as the post-COVID work experience in an office?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's the $1 million question, isn't it? And no, I don't know. It's the short answer. But I do have a perspective on it, which is, so you've got, you've got different companies placing their bets, right? I think Facebook and Google have come out on the side of, giving everybody the opportunity of working virtual if they want to, so they're fully embracing it. And then I think you've got Amazon and Apple kind of not embracing it quite the same extent, and saying that they do want people to return to, physical offices. And so, you got different companies lining up and placing their bets. But one factor that I think is not being adequately accounted for is that, we've been living in COVID times for a while now, right? And companies like, if I think about, my team at Aspiration, it's grown a lot, I've hired a lot of people. The company's hired a crazy amount of people since COVID began. Same at Oscar, it's like very aggressive hiring. So, and those people to a large extent are all over the place, right? Because you couldn't, during COVID, it was very hard to get the talent if you put geographical restrictions on it. So you kind of had to, right? You go wherever the talent is. And if the talent happens to be living in a hut in the Canadian Rockies, then that's what it is. So I think what's happened is, like, over the last, 18 months, is there's just been last year, there's just been a lot of hiring happening, and people have joined with kind of handshake agreements that, when this all blows over, there's going to be some relocation. And we'll see. We'll see whether those relocations happen. I think there's going to be a lot of people out there who got used to working this way, who are going to say, well, no, sorry. I mean, like, I don't think I don't think I'm going to relocate for you. I think I'm going to stay where I am in the Rockies, thanks. And that's going to put companies in a very interesting position, because they're going to need to either, terminate those people and rehire, which is painful and time consuming and expensive, or they're going to have to live with this reality that they've created for themselves, which is, a displaced workforce. So I think that's going to, whether or not, what I'm basically saying is whether you side with the people who think that it should go back to normal or it shouldn't go back to normal, I think the reality is that it's going to be very hard to go back to normal.
Yeah, I mean, there is the new normal is very, very different. And I think the companies that will say, you have to come back, the talent is going to have alternatives to go to other companies that are going to say, we're a little bit more lax about it. And and it creates a very big dilemma for a lot of these organizations, because in the pre-COVID, you had to have your office in a city like a New York or like a Los Angeles or a London, where talent wanted to live. And that's where you could attract that talent. And now, as you were saying, talent want to live wherever they want to live, because they know that they can work virtually. So it's been a tremendous shift. And I mean, have you found it difficult with sort of like team building? And I mean, because if I'm not mistaken, you actually started in COVID, so you've never really been this CMO of this company in an office, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I never met my boss, the CEO of Aspiration, Andre. I've never met him face to face, and don't know when I will. But yeah, so that's weird. There's actually this reverse, I don't know what the right way of phrasing it is, but like there's one of my peers, the chief product officer, Matt, at Aspiration, we met face to face for a coffee, after we're on FaceTime together every day, in meetings together every day, and after a few months, because he lives in Brooklyn as well. So let's just meet up for a coffee. And it was just bizarre. It's just really bizarre to meet somebody physically when you're so used to having a virtual relationship with them. So there's that weird sort of reverse dissonance that happens. I don't know. I think that there's ultimately, like everything in business, it will ultimately it will revert to whatever makes the most sense in economic terms, Right. So if workforces can be productive in a working remotely, certainly when we were at Oscar, I think I was working at Oscar when COVID first hit, and we all went remote, productivity went up. And I know we weren't the only company that happened to, because, Alphabet was a big investor, and, like they were seeing something very similar. So it certainly is possible to work remotely and be as productive, if not more productive. So that's a positive, and saves the company a shed load of money as well, obviously, in terms of expensive rents in places like New York and LA, as you say. So there's lots of reasons.
Travel and entertainment as well.
Travel, just efficiency. I mean, that's what I mean by efficiency. I mean, if you're spending an hour a day or 2 hours a day traveling to and from the office, plus all the time at the office, kind of like hanging out in corridors, chit-chatting, having lunch, whatever, walking to and from meetings, walking into meetings, waiting for people to show up for meetings, trying to decide what the meeting's about.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, it's just, as you know, I'm sure, you're in meetings all the time. There's an efficiency to working remotely that is just, no beating about the bush, right? Straight to the point. What are we here for?
Yeah.
So I like that personally, because you get a lot done. You get a lot more done in the average working day, I find. The downside, of course, is the more intangible aspects of it, which is burnout, stress, separation between work and your personal life. So those things are harder to quantify and harder to measure, and I don't think we have a good answer to that. But I think purely from an economic perspective, which is what, at the end of the day, what most companies are going to respond to, I think, is they won't go back to. They're not in a rush to go back to the old way, because they can get the same amount of productivity out of their workforce for a lot less money. So yeah. I don't think that the ones that can afford to, I think Facebook and Google are embracing it because they can afford to, but you know what I mean?
So we don't have a lot of time left, and I wanted to touch on one more subject before we go, because obviously you've got a lot of experience from Old Navy working in retail, and I wanted to get a sense of where you see the future of retail in a post-COVID world as well.
Oh God, it's been a while since I've been in retail now, but and Old Navy was, we had 1,000 stores across North America, so huge physical presence. I guess my main point, as I would say, is that I think COVID has accelerated a lot of trends that were already happening, right? So there was always there was already a trend towards, retail as experience, and, retail as sort of showcasing the best of the brand, and then, this sort of omni-channel idea that, you give somebody, a glimpse into what's available, and you have people like Reformation doing this early on, where the stores essentially is it's some clothes on a rack, but with an iPad, where you can sort of look at different variations, and then the expectation is you can either buy it remote, but you can buy it digitally in the store, or you can have it shipped, or you can go home and buy it, or whatever. So that whole omnichannel experience is something that was happening pre-COVID anyway. I think it's just similar to the remote working. Like I had already moved pre-COVID. My team were working 3 or 4 days, I can't remember which, from 3 or 4 days at the office and 1 or 2 days at home, as a point of policy, because I just found it to be more effective to be working that way. So I think it was a trend that was happening anyway. Omnichannel was happening, brand retailers experience was happening anyway. I think it's just massively accelerated that. Not all it hasn't affected all sectors equally. Obviously, it was happening in fashion a lot, prior to this, but it probably wasn't happening in all sectors. So in some sectors, I think it's probably brought people into into online shopping, who weren't previously as comfortable with it, who now are completely comfortable with it. And once you experience online shopping in a given set, because at one point people were like, well, they'll never buy luxury online, and then that happened, or never buy cars online, will that happen, or they'll buy houses online, will that happen? So it's
they never bank online, that happened.
There's no going back,
right?
Once that happens. So I think it's just accelerated that trend.
Great. Well, unless you have anything else you want to add to this fascinating conversation, Ivan, I think we're almost up with time, because they cut us off exactly at on the hour. So
7 o'clock in New York. I'm keen for it to be the weekend.
Right. So I will give you back 3 minutes then. Ivan, thank you so much. It's been fascinating. I mean, first of all, your journey has been interesting, and then also, educating us on fintech and clean finance, because it's something that I don't think people really know about, and don't know that there are options to do something about that, along with all the other things. So it's been really an interesting and insightful conversation, and thank you.
Yeah, cool. All right. Thanks for inviting me.
Well, thank you everyone for joining, and we will be back next week. I will announce who that guest is. It's a secret. And have a great weekend, everyone. Stay safe, and look forward to seeing you all soon. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks, man.
Thank you for listening to the Giant Step podcast. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe or follow us on Instagram at Giant Step. Music is by Sinego. Please also visit our website giantstep.net to learn more about our award-winning marketing agency.